November 29, 1970. A father and his two daughters discover a woman's charred body in a remote Norwegian valley. Beside her, fake passports, coded notes, and sleeping pills from another country. 54 years later, we still don't know who she was, or who wanted her dead. Isdalen. In Norwegian, it means ice valley. It's a desolate place, nestled in the mountains outside Bergen on Norway's western coast. In November, when the autumn cold turns to winter, it's nearly impassable. The terrain is rocky, unforgiving, not the kind of place you'd go for a casual hike. And yet, on November 29, 1970, a local man and his two young daughters were walking through this valley when they noticed something unusual. At first, they thought it was a pile of discarded clothing. But as they got closer, the reality became horrifyingly clear. It was a body, a woman, burned beyond recognition, lying on her back in a strange, almost ceremonial position, her arms bent upward, hands clenched near her torso, as though frozen in her final moments. The front of her body was severely charred, but her back remained largely untouched by the flames. The police arrived quickly. What they found at the scene would launch one of the most baffling investigations in Norwegian history. Scattered around the body were items that seemed deliberately placed. A matchbox, a watch, 2 earrings, a purse, an umbrella, nylon stockings, a fur hat, rubber boots, 2 plastic water bottles, an empty liqueur bottle, and sleeping pills. But here's what made investigators pause. Every single label that could identify the woman from her clothing, her belongings, even the tags on her coat, had been meticulously removed. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure she could never be identified. The question was simple, but the answer would prove impossible. Who was she? The autopsy revealed details that only deepened the mystery. The woman was approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a slim build and dark brown hair. She weighed between 120 and 130 pounds. Her dental work was extensive: 14 fillings and multiple gold crowns, far more than what you'd typically expect for someone who appeared to be in her 20s or 30s. But it was the cause of death that troubled investigators most. The medical examiner determined she had died from a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and a massive overdose of phenobarbital, a powerful barbiturate. In fact, she had ingested between 50 and 70 sleeping pills. 12 more were found beside her body. Here's where it gets stranger. The pills were pink, a specific variety of phenol that was only sold in England. At the time, not the white version available in Norway. Traces of gasoline were found on her clothing and in the surrounding area. The burns on her body indicated she had been doused with petrol and set on fire. But here's the critical detail. There was soot in her lungs. That means she was still breathing as she burned. She was alive. Investigators also noted bruising on her neck, possibly from a fall or a blow. And despite the initial theory that she'd accidentally caught fire from a campfire, there was no evidence of any campfire at the scene. The police ruled it a suicide. But decades later, many of the officers involved would admit they never believed that conclusion. Police lawyer Carl Halver would later state, "We talked about it in the police, but as far as I remember, very few thought it was suicide. I do not believe it was suicide. If it wasn't suicide, then what happened in that valley?" 3 days after the body was discovered, 2 unclaimed suitcases were found at Bergen railway station. Inside, investigators found items that would turn this case from a tragic death into an international enigma. The suitcases contained clothing, wigs, prescription-free, glasses with a fingerprint that matched the Isdal Woman, cosmetics, eczema cream, currency from 5 different countries: Germany, Norway, Belgium, England, and Sweden, and hidden in the lining 500 German marks and 130 Norwegian crowns sewn carefully into the fabric. But the most revealing items were 9 passports. Each one bore a different name. a different identity. The photos showed the same woman, but with different hairstyles, different clothing, different personas. Fenella Lork, Genevieve Lancier, Claudia Tealt, Claudia Nielsen, Alexia Zarn Merches, Vera Jarl, Elizabeth Lean Halfer, all of them fake. And then there was the notebook, a small black diary filled with what appeared to be gibberish, rows of numbers, codes. It took investigators time to realize what they were. Looking at it was a travel log. Once decoded, the notebook revealed a meticulous record of the woman's movements across Europe. Hotels, train stations, cities, dates. She had been traveling extensively for months, always using different names, always paying in cash, always moving. But the most unsettling detail came from the hotel staff who had encountered her during her stays in Norway. Multiple witnesses reported that she seemed nervous, paranoid even. She would request specific rooms, never on the ground floor. She avoided being photographed. She kept to herself, speaking broken English, German, and Flemish. One hotel receptionist recalled that the woman had checked out of the hotel Hordeheimen in Bergen on November 23rd, just 6 days before her body was found. She had been alive. She had been in the city, and then she disappeared into the wilderness. To understand what happened to the Isdal woman, we need to trace her final months. Spring 1970. Between March and April, the woman traveled through Norway for several weeks, staying in hotels in Oslo, Trondheim, Stavanger, and Bergen. She used multiple aliases. She paid in cash. She left no trace. On April 1st, she purchased a train ticket to Basel, Switzerland. Then she vanished from Norway. Late June to early July 1970, the woman reappeared in Paris, staying at 2 different hotels under the name Vera Schlosseneck. Here's where a troubling connection emerges. During the exact same period, a Swiss banker named Francois Janud was also in Paris. Janud was no ordinary financier. He was a known Nazi sympathizer who had managed funds for the Third Reich and, in his later years, supported Palestinian militant groups. On June 26th and 27th, Janud met with Wadi Haddad, a high-ranking member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Janud returned to Paris again on July 3rd through the 5th. Was the Isdal woman in Paris for the same reason? Was she connected to Janud's network? We don't know, but the timeline is difficult to ignore. Late October 1970, the woman returned to Paris, staying at the Calais and Altena hotels between October 22nd and 28th. On October 29th, she boarded a flight from Paris to Stavanger, Norway. She was beginning her second trip through the country. November 1970, she moved between cities, always using fake names, always changing hotels. On November 23rd, she checked out of room 407 at the Hotel Hordeheimen in Bergen. The receptionist remembered her clearly. She seemed anxious, in a hurry. The next day, November 24th, a Bergen resident reported seeing a woman matching her description on a hiking trail in the mountains. She was dressed strangely for the terrain, wearing clothing entirely inappropriate for a hike. But she wasn't alone. 2 men were walking behind her. They wore long coats. The witness described them as looking southern, possibly Mediterranean or Middle Eastern. The woman was walking ahead of them, separate, but not far. 5 days later, she was dead. For over 50 years, investigators, journalists, and armchair detectives have tried to piece together who the Isdal woman was and what she was doing in Norway. There are 3 main theories. Theory 1, espionage. The most popular theory is that the Isdal woman was a spy. The evidence is compelling. Multiple fake passports, coded travel logs, frequent border crossings, paranoid behavior, a connection to Francois Janud, a man with deep ties to international militant networks. Some researchers have noted that her movements through Norway in the 1960 South coincided with the testing of the Norwegian Penguin missile, a highly classified military project. But there are problems with this theory. Her behavior seemed erratic, not the calculated precision you'd expect from a trained intelligence officer. She drew attention to herself by constantly changing hotels and using obvious fake names. If she was a spy, she wasn't a very good one. And if she was working for a government, why has no agency ever claimed her? Theory 2. Sex work. Norwegian author Dennis Zacher proposed a different explanation. He believes the Isdal Woman was a high-end sex worker, traveling across Europe to meet wealthy clients. This theory is based on several factors: her goal-oriented travel routes, always returning to the same cities; her desire to remain anonymous; her behavior at hotels, often meeting men who never came forward after her death. It would explain the wigs, the disguises, the different identities. But it doesn't explain the sleeping pills from England, the coded notebook, the two men seen following her in the mountains, and it doesn't explain why someone would go to such lengths to erase her identity. Theory 3. The Francois-Junud connection. In 2023, the Swiss newspaper Neue Zürcher Zeitung published an explosive investigation suggesting that the Isdal Woman may have been connected to Junud's network of Palestinian operatives. The article raised a disturbing question. Was she given an assignment in Norway? Was she killed because she knew too much? The overlapping timelines in Paris, the two men seen with her, the strange, almost ritualistic positioning of her body. Forensic psychiatrist Frank Urbaniak reviewed the case and concluded, suicide is very unlikely. A great deal here indicates the involvement of a third party, but if she was murdered, who did it? And why? On February 5, 1971, the Isdal Woman was buried in an unmarked grave at Mallendal Cemetery in Bergen. Because no one knew her religion, she was given Catholic rites, a guess, based on the prevalence of Catholicism in Europe. She was placed in a zinc coffin, a precaution in case her body ever needed to be exhumed for further testing. The case was officially closed, but it was never forgotten. In 2016, the case was reopened after a previously unreported rucksack containing the woman's personal effects was discovered in the evidence room at Bergen Police headquarters. New forensic techniques were applied. Stable isotope analysis of her teeth revealed that she was likely born around 1930 in or near Nuremberg, Germany, but she had moved to France or the France-Germany border as a child. DNA analysis indicated a matrilineal line originating in Southeast Europe or Southwest Asia. She was older than initially believed, around 40 years old when she died, not in her 20s or 30s. But even with these advancements, her name remains unknown. The Isdal Woman case is haunted by questions that may never be answered. Who was she, really? Beneath the aliases and the wigs and the fake passports, who was the person lying in that valley? Why did she go to Isdalen after taking a lethal dose of sleeping pills? If she intended to die from the overdose, why set herself on fire? And how could she have managed to do all of that while heavily sedated? Who were the two men seen with her on November 24th? Were they simply fellow hikers? Or were they the last people to see her alive? What was her mission? The coded notebook, the extensive travel, the disguises, they all point to someone operating in secret. But for whom and why? And perhaps the most troubling question of all, did Norwegian intelligence interfere with the investigation? A 2023 article suggested that Norway's intelligence service may have deliberately obstructed local police, preventing them from pursuing certain leads. If that's true, what were they trying to hide? There's a theory that the case was closed not because it was solved, but because it had implications too dangerous to pursue, that the Isdal Woman was connected to something larger, something that powerful people wanted buried. But that's speculation. What we know for certain is this: a woman died alone in a frozen valley. She was burned, poisoned, and stripped of her identity. And for over 50 years, no one has been able to give her back her name. The Isdal Woman rests in an unmarked grave in Bergen, waiting for someone to recognize her face in an old photograph, waiting for a family member to come forward, waiting for the truth to finally surface. In 2017, her grave was marked with a small plaque. It reads simply, "The Isdal Woman. Death in Ice Valley," but that's not her name. And until we know who she was, the mystery will remain. So we're left with one final question, the question that has haunted this case for more than half a century. Was the Isdal Woman a spy who knew too much? A victim of a conspiracy that reached across borders? Or simply a woman trying to disappear, who succeeded too well? Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is this: someone, somewhere, knows exactly who she was, and they've chosen to stay silent. If you have any information about the Isdal Woman, please contact the Bergen Police Department.